Okay, if you're in the mood to be either mad or disgusted, gear up for the new HBO original documentary, The Alabama Solution. It's a horrifying examination of the prison system in, well, you guessed it, Alabama. Incarcerated men defy the odds to expose a cover-up in one of the United States' deadliest prison systems. What makes this documentary film so unique is that after a film crew was in a prison to document a church outreach type of thing, they're approached by a couple of inmates who wanted to get a message to the outside world about how the inmates were suffering inhumane treatment and then being subjected to modern-day slavery. And no, this is not some bleeding heart story that looks at all of these men and women as undeserving souls who have done no wrong. Those that are incarcerated, they readily admit that they did bad things and made poor choices that landed them in the clink. But once you get to see the rampant abuse and even murder that takes place at the hands of the Department of Corrections, it's difficult to be unaffected. Now, this is filmed in sort of a guerrilla manner. The inmates aren't allowed phones, but so many of them still have them, which a lot of them are mostly supplied by the guards themselves. So we get to see and then hear video interviews and then hear first and second-hand accounts of atrocities that take place frequently within the walls. The videos are sometimes glitchy and stuttering. I mean, as you can imagine, the signal is probably fairly bad, just thanks to the layers of concrete. But the recordings are clear enough that we can see emotions, see the wounds, and hear the fear, even sometimes hope within the voices. Now, I was absolutely shocked and then pissed at what I was seeing and hearing. Not about a riot breaking out and then inmates getting injured as guards attempted to regain control. Instead, we get to hear about guards coming in and stomping a man to death after he was unarmed. The imagery is horrendously terrible. It's brutality at its worst, with pretty much zero oversight or consequences, other than, inmates being murdered. And despite the stomach-turning visuals of abject violence, the stories, they're engaging. They're excruciating at times to watch, and then maddening because of all the injustice we see, but they're still very impactful. This is just under 2 hours, and when we're not hearing from inmates, we get to see interviews with the family members of an inmate who was murdered in his cell by guards, the civil rights attorney who's attempting to get that family justice, plus talks with the dude who's in charge of all of the prisons in Alabama, as well as watching news footage of some local and state government as they contemplate reform. But don't get your hopes up that they're actually looking to improve. It's an Alabama problem, and they're going to get an Alabama solution. That's what the governor said. But from what I saw, their solutions, they suck, and they are completely ineffective. While so much of this is filled with melancholy, there are some bright and encouraging elements to what we watch play out. Several of the inmates discuss how they became part of this inner society, or maybe it was a club, that was led by some older black men, some of whom had marched with Martin Luther King Jr. at Selma. And then through this group, the younger men, they learned decorum, etiquette, life skills, coping mechanisms, along with then the rules of law, Alabama criminal codes, legal information, even the U.S. Constitution and the Bill of Rights. And it's uplifting to hear about how these once potentially violent men now believe they can create more change and betterment by using their intellect rather than their fists. And the downside, though, is that many of the guards only have discussions through their boots and their batons. The documentary also does an excellent job of highlighting how the internal issue of corrupt guards, it isn't the sole problem. There's overcrowding within inmate spaces. Correction officers are massively short-staffed and then overworked, creating some environments where guards are either asleep or just completely absent, which then allows for all sorts of sketchy things to happen on both sides of the fence. The storytelling also focuses on the drug abuse that runs rampant, which probably comes as no surprise that much of the drugs come in via the guards. But instead of using earmarked money for addiction treatment, the inmates, they just have to try and figure out recovery on their own, or the OD. And we get to see many of them either crashing out or just blitzed into oblivion. It's sad. Now, this is a dark watch, but thankfully, as I had mentioned, there are some moments of positivity, even in the midst of tragic events. Now, something that did make me irate is hearing audio of some morning jocks at a radio station discussing how the inmates deserved anything they got because they're bad people and are in prison for a reason. Now, I can understand that mentality, but the prisoner treatment isn't focused on rehabilitation like it is in many other countries. Here, it's just free slave labor, where we hear story after story after story of inmates who are furloughed out into the community to work for state or local agencies and are either not paid, or if they are paid, they get $2 per day for a full day's work. The kicker is, though, that these people who are trusted to be out working in the community, sometimes even in public areas where children and families gather, these same inmates, they're denied parole time and time again. And we get to hear about one inmate who got 15 years for breaking into an empty building. Now, he didn't take anything, he didn't harm anyone, or even threaten anybody, and it was a first-time offense. Then he got 15 years in a maximum security prison. Now, I don't know if you've ever seen The Night Of, but you know that the probability of coming out of prison unchanged, that's next to zero, especially if you were innocent or a minor offender. This dude was not being placed for any sort of rehabilitation. It was servitude. And in this case, the punishment, it did not fit the crime. But the jocks are just callous, mirroring a lot of the mindsets of the public, and then in some instances, fanning the flames to evoke even more ire. Now, the facts and figures we're left with through on-screen cards, they're disgusting and stomach-churning. There is so much injustice in a place that is supposed to uphold justice. And then anyone who has the power to enforce change simply looks the other way and allows the atrocities to continue. While this documentary is focused on telling the stories of the prisoner mistreatment instead of allowing equal time for the Department of Corrections to respond, we do get testimony from DOC. And they don't do themselves any favor of garnering respect or even approval. This is an important, relevant presentation that reaches far beyond Alabama. And while it may not serve as anything other than a horror show for those outside the U.S., those of us in this country should really pay attention and want true justice upheld because it has the potential to affect every citizen. This is a tough but rewarding watch, and more of these investigations I think should take place. There's no sex, tiny bit of nudity, a lot of profanity, and then a bunch of cruel violence. Now, as a reminder, I don't give couch ratings to documentaries, but The Alabama Solution, it is a must-watch film. So, have you seen any other great documentaries lately? I watched another HBO one called Quiet in Class, and it is a horrifyingly tragic story that should make you want to reach for something sharp and then go after your local pedo. Which, that's not a bad idea anyway. But let me know if you've watched something great in the comments below. If you enjoyed this review, please give it a like. Also, don't forget to share and subscribe. I'm Chris. This is Movies and Munchies. Thanks for couching with me.